And thank you to Jack Burston for being here today with us to give a keynote to our session today. So, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Hello. Let me do some introductions. Professor Jack Burston holds the position of Honorary Research Fellow in the Language Center of the Cyprus University of Technology. He is a language teaching specialist with a formal background in theoretical and applied linguistics, second language acquisition and testing. His current research is focused on mobile-assisted language learning and advanced level foreign language instruction. Jack is a current member of the Editorial Board of the CALICO Journal, Language Learning and Technology Journal, and the Journal of Teaching English with Technology. He also served for many years on the Editorial Board of the CALICO Journal and was the software review editor of the CALICO Journal for 13 years. Today, he will speak about how to effectively exploit ubiquitous technology in the teaching and learning of foreign languages. Especially the topic of this talk is how to effectively exploit ubiquity technology in the teaching and learning of foreign languages. The presentation begins with a consideration of the role that mobile-assisted language learning has contributed to this process, and then proceeds to suggest ways that this contribution needs to expand to more fully exploit the language learning potential of mobile technologies. So thank you so much. So we are happy to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maria, for the introduction. Let me begin by saying that even the least experienced language teacher knows or very soon discovers that there's never enough time in class to do everything you need to do to cover your curriculum. This, of course, is why homework was invented. But until the advent of modern technology, homework exercises were restricted to text-based homework. In the 1960s, recording technology format changed to cassette tapes. And that allowed the homework exercises to extend to pronunciation and speaking exercises. But it's only been since the appearance of affordable multimedia desktop and laptop computers and wireless internet connectivity that the full range of language learning activities has been possible outside of class. When we talk about ubiquitous language learning, the first thing that almost always comes to mind is MAL, that is mobile-assisted language learning. Because of the anywhere, anytime nature of the mobile applications, it is simply assumed by definition that MAL is going to be ubiquitous. However, there's a question there about how ubiquitous MAL really is, and I think it is less ubiquitous than a lot of its proponents would like us to believe. For example, in school systems, it is very commonly, almost always the case, that students are not allowed to use their mobile phones on campus. And mobile phones happen to be the most widely used form of mobile device. Also, there are times and places where it is just not appropriate to undertake MAL activities. A good example would be listening and pronunciation exercises. Very few students would feel comfortable doing these exercises out loud in public. There is, however, one aspect that is certainly ubiquitous with respect to MAL, and that has to do with mobile device ownership. In the world, at tertiary level, university, college students, mobile phone, smartphone. These days, when you say mobile phone, it is smartphone. It's very hard to find any other kind of mobile phone. But at college, university level, worldwide, mobile phone ownership is virtually 100%. In some cases, I've seen in Japan, for example, it's over 100% because some students have more than one telephone. High school students are not far behind. And certainly in more affluent countries, smartphone ownership goes all the way down to primary school students. That being said, just because all the students have mobile phones doesn't mean that they are going to automatically use them for language learning purposes. Glenn Stockwell, in a number of articles, repeatedly showed that given the option, given the opportunity, students overwhelmingly would opt to use desktop computers over their mobile devices if the desktop was available. The handheld devices lose favor rapidly when extensive writing is required. As soon as anything more than a few simple sentences have to be produced, the lack of a physical keyboard becomes the Achilles heel of handheld mobile devices. And also the larger screen size of laptops and desktops makes them more attractive if a student has the option of using them rather than a mobile phone. This still begs a very big question as to whether or not we should be using MAL. Is it effective? And the answer to that question is overwhelmingly yes. Of the over 850 studies, MAL studies published in the past 30 years, which objectively evaluate quantitative language learning outcomes, 82% report results where the MAL groups outperform the non-MAL control groups. In 15% of the cases, there was no significant difference. And only in 3% of the cases did the non-MAL control group outperform the MAL group. Well, obviously, MAL is worth considering. But I hasten to point out that if it's going to be effective, it needs to fit within the curriculum. It simply cannot be adopted in isolation. And this is the greatest shortcoming of the commercial across-the-counter MAL app applications. They simply do not fit into anyone's curriculum. Even when MAL implementations are aligned with the curriculum, it's important that they not focus on single isolated content or skill areas. And this is the major shortcoming of locally developed implementations. The biggest example of that has to do with vocabulary. Vocabulary in the form of flashcards or text messaging of words and expressions and definitions accounts for over 40% of all MAL implementations. There is this intense focus on one thing, vocabulary. To the extent that vocabulary on its own accounts for almost as much of the MAL implementations of reading, writing, speaking, listening combined. Vocabulary is important, okay. But learning vocabulary only makes sense to the extent that it gets applied to actual language usage. And this is true as well of grammar and reading, listening, speaking exercises. They're only of value to the extent that they get applied to real language usage. Yet historically, MAL applications have been overwhelmingly implemented, implicitly or explicitly, in a behaviorist learning theory framework in which structuralist pedagogical methodologies have dominated. A decade ago, Goodwin Jones, remarking on the preceding decade of MAL implementations, had this to say about it in summary. He said, for the most part, uses of mobile devices were pedestrian, they were uncreative, they were repetitive, and did not take advantage of the mobility, the peer connectivity, or the advanced communication features of mobile devices. Most activities were teacher-led and scheduled, not leveraging the anytime, anyplace mobile environment. Oral interactions and learner collaboration were infrequently used. Although in the intervening years, more learner-centered communicative MAL implementations have appeared, teacher-directed, tutorial-based activities continue to dominate. The problem here is not with teacher direction or tutorial exercises in themselves, but rather the failure to apply them as a means to a communicative end. Vocabulary and grammar do have to be learned, and teachers are much better placed than students to know what is likely to be most useful. So too, the effectiveness of structuralist methodologies has been substantiated through decades of research and practical experience, and language teachers continue to use them because they work. They can, in fact, provide essential, effective support for communicative language learning activities. Ironically, the great majority of MAL implementations, past and present, fails to exploit the communication potential of mobile devices, especially that of mobile phones. The current exploitation of ubiquitous technology for foreign language teaching and learning, and MAL in particular, thus leaves much to be desired. The effective use of digital technology, however, is not just a question of technology usage. It's a matter of underlying pedagogy, which Ursula was just talking about. It's very true. You need to start with clearly defined learning objectives, and you need to apply sound pedagogical methodologies to achieve them. In terms of the technological requirements, MAL language learning activities need to be as platform independent as possible. If not, they can't be ubiquitous. In this regard, it needs to be remembered that even today, the most ubiquitously accessible technological learning device is the printed book. It can be graphically illustrated, handheld, it's highly portable, it's platform independent. It can be used virtually anytime, anywhere. It's unaffected by network disruptions and never needs battery recharging. PDF versions are equally accessible to any computer-based device. In a word, textbooks and related printed materials need to be part of the ubiquitous technology toolkit. Although mobile devices represent the cornerstone of ubiquitous digital technologies, it's important not to restrict language learning resources and activities to mobile devices to the exclusion of their full-fledged counterparts. Related to the issue of platform independence, when mobile devices are used, accessing learning resources should not require any particular operating system. If the app only runs on Android or only runs on iOS, it is not ubiquitous. MAL apps need to be multi-platform or browser-based. The goal should be for these technological tools to be as transparent as possible, readily accessible, and chosen by students based on which does the best job at any particular time. Within the framework of tutorial MAL, exploiting the ubiquitous potential of mobile devices is not difficult. Programs like Quizlet operate on all smartphones and tablets, as well as laptops and desktops. More importantly, they allow the creation of tutorial exercises based on user-supplied content, supplied from students as well as from instructors, so they can be closely integrated into the curriculum. Virtual platform-independent language labs like SchoolShape extend the out-of-class tutorial activities even further. The great attractiveness of Tutorial Mall is the ease with which they can be easily adapted by instructors, but therein also resides their greatest potential shortcoming. For without follow-up application to communicative language activities, their use is of limited effectiveness. This is precisely the Mall failing that Goodwin Jones lamented. Exploiting the communicative affordances of ubiquitous digital technology is where the greatest language learning gains and student satisfaction are to be found. However, this requires considerably more effort, engagement, and ingenuity on the part of both teachers and students. The theoretical underpinning for such activity is to be found in social constructivism and task-based situated learning. Whereas Tutorial Mall takes learning out of the classroom, these task-based activities have the opposite effect. They bring the real world back into the learning process and back into the classroom. The tasks that are most effectively driving communicative foreign language learning are those that are personalized and collaborative. What these are, of course, depends crucially upon the interest of the students, their age, and especially their linguistic competence level. But I would hasten to point out that with tutorial preparation, even beginners can engage in these activities. And this is where innovation and creativity play a critical role. Modern mobile devices, smartphones, tablets, in fact, have the ability to create language learning related artifacts such as pictures and audio video recordings outside of the classroom, out in the real world. And wireless internet connectivity allows these artifacts to be readily shared among language learners in the pursuit of a common task. Instant messaging apps like Twitter or WhatsApp allow learners to coordinate their efforts orally and textually in the L2. Web-based platforms like Google Docs provide a central storage place for artifacts supporting the task-based assignments. And they provide a common workplace for discussion of them. And because they are accessible on laptop and desktop computers, they allow for extensive writing to be done using physical keyboards and full-fledged word processors. I think, as most, if not all of you would agree, as practicing language teachers, motivation is the single greatest factor in successful language learning. And the published results of technology-mediated collaborative task-based learning in Mall studies, almost without exception, demonstrate very high student satisfaction and learning motivation. In sum, grounded in well-established learning theories and proven pedagogical methodologies, the exploitation of ubiquitous digital technology has the potential to greatly affect foreign language learning. While tutorial applications have an important role to play in this process, they must be considered as a means for supporting communicative task-based language activities and not an end in themselves. Likewise, although mobile devices constitute the backbone of ubiquitous technology, the most effective exploitation of digital technologies requires that the use of mobile devices not preclude that of other resources, including printed ones. The promise of effectively exploiting ubiquitous technologies for foreign language teaching and learning is great, but so too is the challenge of actually doing so. The technologies are there and they're readily accessible, to the point where BYOD, bring your own device, is a feasible approach for all but perhaps primary school environments. Likewise, wireless internet access is well established, even in developing countries. But where do foreign language teachers begin in familiarizing themselves with available MAL options? The problem here is not a lack of information, but rather its overabundance. In fact, the need to keep up in MAL even puts specialist researchers to the test and frequently finds them wanting. During the past 3 decades, more than 3,900 MAL studies have appeared, 3,900 studies, 1,500 during the last 5 years alone. Despite their abundance, or perhaps because of their abundance, locating these publications is no easy task, for they appear in the most unlikely places. Only about 10% of them appear in prominent CAL or educational technology journals like Recall, CALICO, British Journal of Educational Technology, etc. The other 90% are to be found in places that you would probably never think to look, as illustrated on the screen. The International Journal of Distributed and Parallel Systems, Journal of U.S.-China Public Administration, Agro-Food Industry, High-Tech, et cetera, et cetera. Also, quite a number of studies appear in unpublished MA and PhD dissertations. Needless to say, without a firm understanding of what has already been done in MAL, teachers wanting to adopt it are bound to reinvent the wheel, to fall into the same traps, and ignore promising possibilities. Fortunately, 2 comprehensive MAL bibliographies, each of over 300 pages in length, have just recently been published, which should greatly simplify the task of reference gathering. I know these bibliographies well because I'm the one who put them together. And there is a hyperlink to them in an article that I just had published in the Computer Assisted Language Learning Journal. The URL is indicated on screen for you there. The first of the bibliographies is a general bibliography, and it covers all possible MAL topics and includes over 3,800 entries. The second bibliography is a subset of the first. It's the Selected Annotated Bibliography of Implementation Studies, 1994 to 2020. It contains, these are just the MAL, experimental MAL studies, and it contains over 1,270 entries. Each of these is accompanied by a brief 90-word synopsis. To the extent that these publications themselves provide the information, the summary includes essential details relating to the institutional environment, whether it's primary school, secondary school, college, university, language center, the mobile devices used, the native language of the student, the target language, the language proficiency level of participants, and the targeted skill areas. Now, the bibliography is organized alphabetically, but you can easily do a word search. You can download these and do a word search for the language or for the environment. Do a word search for French or for Italian or for Spanish or for primary school or secondary school. You can likewise do searches for competence levels, A2, B1, C1, intermediate, beginners, whatever, which will allow you to zero in on the studies that would be of most relevance to you. You likewise can do word searches for skills areas, look for vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, whatever is of interest to you. You can likewise do word searches based on pedagogical methodologies, look for task-based or collaborative or situated or peer correction, that sort of thing. The great majority of these references in both bibliographies include hyperlinks to the source. So you can click on the entry and find where the study is. And in many cases, you can simply download directly the studies. A number of them have to be paid for, or at least require a library subscription. But by clicking on them, you could at least find out where they are. And if they are free, download them. If they're not, take note of it and go through your library to get them. All right, to conclude now. Digital technologies exist widely that can greatly facilitate foreign language teaching and learning, with student-owned smartphones at the top of the list. While mobile devices are at the heart of ubiquitous technology access, it's critically important that their use be viewed as complementary to and not a replacement of non-mobile technologies. In combination with portable and fixed devices, it's possible not only to effectively extend foreign language exposure and practice out of the classroom, but also to bring language-related real-world artifacts back into the classroom. The effective adoption of MAL requires curricular integration and presupposes clear language learning objectives and sound pedagogical methodologies, which include tutorial exercises that prepare students, prepare the groundwork for meaningful communicative activities. Successful MAL implementation can be highly motivating, but also requires considerable effort and engagement from instructors and students alike. And getting started is no easy task for teachers who must first inform themselves about MAL options. What works well, what doesn't work so well, what implementations might be worth exploring. The MAL bibliographies that I've just mentioned should prove very useful in providing this critical information. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Burston.